from Quarantine Central. Last week I published an article suggesting that I'm a lot more optimistic than a lot of people about how the coronavirus crisis is going to work out. I encourage you to read it. It's called Confessions of a Hopeless Optimist, and you can find it on my website. In my article, I suggested that there might be some similarity to a historical event called the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894. There's some elements that might be worth comparing. So I'm coming at you today to talk about how those elements have developed here a week after I published the article. I made the case that it's not uncommon in history for expert analysts to make overly negative predictions about the future impact of a problem because they fall prey to what I call the extrapolation fallacy. They extrapolate the current problem indefinitely into the future, and they don't account for new developments that can change the game. I also made the point that in the case of the coronavirus, this kind of extrapolation is particularly tricky because the current numbers for how contagious the disease is and how many infections there are and the death rate are very unreliable due to poor testing quality. I cited the study done by the Imperial College in London, which has been cited as the primary reason that the UK and many other countries have adopted the current policies on extreme social distancing. That study painted an incredibly bleak picture and estimated that the virus could kill 91 million people worldwide. So let's call the Imperial College the doomsday crowd. I also suggested that there's a possibility that the reported numbers used to create that analysis could be way off. In fact, there's also a competing study which was done at Oxford University that makes the case that it's possible that the coronavirus is much more contagious, but much less deadly than current projections indicate. That study makes the case that the coronavirus has been running rampant since it was first discovered back on November 17th, and that it's infected millions and millions globally, but that the overwhelming majority of those cases were so mild that they were never reported. They argue that the death rate is thus much lower than we currently think, and that it's possible that so much of the global population has already had it that we may even be approaching the level of herd immunity that could cause the virus to die out. Let's call the Oxford group the don't worry, be happy crowd. So the debate between these two crowds has been quite intense and has become very politicized in many circles. I personally have no interest in entering that controversial fray, and since I'm not a scientist, I'm not qualified to have an opinion either way. In fact, my primary thesis is that really nobody is qualified to really know which of these two stories is true, because we just don't have the solid data we need about how contagious or how deadly the disease really is. Instead, I'd simply like to point out a development which has occurred this week that I think is cause for optimism. So this week, Neil Ferguson, who's the primary researcher who published the Imperial College study, has changed his outlook. Based on the current numbers, Mr. Ferguson now believes that the virus is more contagious than his prior model indicated, but that it's also less deadly. Given that, and also given the early success of social distancing, based on the numbers he sees, he's now reasonably confident that the UK hospital system is prepared to cope with the new flow of patients, and he doesn't believe that there's going to be an overwhelm of the healthcare system there. He has revised his projected death toll down from 500,000 deaths in the UK to roughly 20,000 deaths in the UK, and suspects that even that might be an overestimate. The second similarity my article named with the horse manure crisis was that the worst projections would be sensationalized by a hysterical media who would only report the scariest and most dire news about the situation, and that their powers to do so would be massively enhanced by social media. Well, here we sit a week later, and I'm pretty confident this similarity is coming true. I could cite examples of this all day long, but probably the most glaring example is this reversal by the Imperial College. In my view, this is one of the most significant and optimistic bits of news that's been reported about the virus in weeks. The primary researcher who we've all relied on to make global policy just reduced his death count by 96%. But for some reason, I haven't seen this reported in any of the major US news outlets. The third similarity my article outlined is that in many crises, the game gets changed by human ingenuity, and that when we're faced with a problem, humans have a way of innovating a solution way before the problem gets out of control. Well, a week later, it seems fairly clear that the consensus is that our ground war of social distancing is working, particularly in Italy, where there may be a slowing down of both the new case reporting and new deaths, both of which hit a peak on March 21st and have been lower every day since. Yes, early numbers. More importantly, though, I remain confident that a successful therapeutic drug will be discovered, which may not be a cure for the virus, but which will be effective enough to dampen the impact of hospitalizations and deaths in a meaningful way. So far, there's really no breakthrough news on this front in a week, but there are several candidates for which hopes are high, including the Gilead drug, which has almost completed a human trial, and the arthritis and malaria drugs I cited, which are already approved for human use and are already being prescribed and are in clinical trials as well. Certainly none of these drugs has experienced a setback, which would indicate it won't be successful, except of course for the sad case in which a couple in Arizona thought they were taking one of these drugs but actually ingested fishbowl cleaner. Time will tell on that one, but I remain confident in the powers of the scientific community. Finally, my article talked about the stock market and the prospects for recovery in our economy. I suggested that my experience was the stock market would likely become overdone with panic, but that it would hit a bottom, and when it did, the chances were high that it would bounce back with equal force to the decline that preceded it. On Monday, equities hit a bottom and have experienced the largest three-day rise in the last 85 years. Of course, I'm also smart enough not to know that this is no time to be taking any kind of victory lap. A lot of people believe the current bounce will probably sell back off and decline back at least to the low or possibly lower. Of course, that could happen in the short run, and I'm certainly not saying it won't. But I continue to believe that the price levels that were reached on Monday afternoon were reflective of the most pessimistic expectation for the length of the shutdown and the level of contraction our economy will experience. And I continue to believe that the truth will be more optimistic than that. I believe the economy will be shut down for a shorter period of time than most people expect, and that belief has been reinforced this week by the news I just talked about. And I also believe that although the economy is certainly not going to recover overnight, it will also recover faster than most people think, thanks to the underlying strength of our economy before this whole mess started. I also wouldn't underestimate the impact of several $1 trillion of stimulus on our economy and our stock market over time. I continue to believe that investors who have a reasonable time horizon of at least 5 years for their equity portfolio will look back on this week as a really attractive time to be adding to their holdings. Nothing has happened in the last week that's changed that view. I'll end with a little commercial for my firm. I know this is a scary time for a lot of reasons and for a lot of people. Many people are worried that their investments are behaving in a way that they didn't expect and they don't totally understand. So if that describes you, know that you have a friend here who will do our best to offer you a sympathetic and unbiased second opinion. Warren Buffett once said, "Every decade or so, dark clouds will fill the economic skies, and then they will briefly rain gold." I'd love to help you to turn the dark clouds we're seeing today into the gold of opportunity. Let me know if it would be helpful to set up a call. So in parting, be of good cheer, my friends. This too will pass. And no matter what, nobody can argue with me on this fact. Today, we are 1 week closer to the end of this crisis than we were when I published my article last Friday.